For centuries, the story of the witch trials has been painted with one simple image: a mob of superstitious fanatics hunting down women for the impossible crime of magic. We're told it was all about a fear of the devil, a tragic but straightforward case of religious hysteria. But the deadliest witch hunt in American history wasn't kicked off by a prayer. It was kicked off by a legal document. And the fuel for the fire wasn't just scripture. It was failing crops, a government on the brink of collapse, and the cold, hard desperation of neighbors who saw a rival's downfall as their only way to survive. The witch trials were never really about witches. They were about scapegoats. The story we all learn is that a simple belief in witchcraft caused the hunts that saw tens of thousands executed across Europe, and a smaller but infamous number in colonial America. But that belief is only a tiny part of the story. Superstition didn't create the crisis. It was the language people used to explain a crisis that was already destroying their world. It was a symptom, not the disease. The truth is much more calculated, and frankly, much more terrifying. The great witch hunts weren't a search for the supernatural. They were a violent and sometimes strategic response to a perfect storm of three very real-world forces: catastrophic climate change, total political collapse, and bitter economic warfare. When a society is squeezed by forces it can't control, it looks for a miracle. It looks for a villain. Our story starts not with a devil, but with the weather. From around 1300 to 1850, much of the world was in the grip of a brutal period of cooling known as the Little Ice Age. This wasn't just a few chilly winters. This was a series of vicious, unpredictable weather extremes. The Thames River in London froze solid, and alpine glaciers crept forward, literally swallowing villages whole. This shift plunged Europe and North America into an era of violent storms, killer frosts in May, and crops rotting from endless summer rain. For farming communities whose entire existence depended on the harvest, this was an existential threat. Year after year of crop failures meant famine was a constant looming specter, bringing malnutrition and disease with it. This level of suffering demanded an explanation. When misfortune is that constant and that severe, it stops feeling random. It starts to feel like an attack. And in this environment of starvation and fear, an old folk belief gained terrifying new power. The idea that a malicious person. Suddenly, accusations of weather-making exploded. Historians have mapped the data, and the correlation is stunning. The most intense periods of witch hunting in Europe, especially between 1560 and 1660, perfectly align with the absolute coldest decades of the Little Ice Age. When a hailstorm wiped out a village's livelihood in 1562, people concluded it couldn't be natural, and soon after, the witch hunts began. It was a simple, brutal equation. Bad weather meant bad harvests meant desperation, and desperation led to communities demanding that someone, anyone, find and eliminate the witches they believed were responsible. But a starving, angry population is only one part of the recipe. To turn that anger into a systematic, legal machine of death, you need a second ingredient: the total collapse of political authority. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are the perfect case study. This crisis didn't happen in a stable, functioning society. It happened in a power vacuum. A few years earlier, the King of England had revoked the Massachusetts Bay Colony's charter, the very document that gave it the right to govern itself. The hated British governor who was installed was then overthrown, leaving the colony in a state of political limbo for 3 years. They had no legitimate governor, no valid charter, and no stable government. This chaos was the critical opening the witch hunt needed. When the first accusations bubbled up in Salem Village, there was no legitimate legal system to handle them. So the new governor, William Phips, created a special emergency court to hear and determine the cases. the Court of Oyer and Terminer. This court was a legal catastrophe. Operating without established rules, it made one fateful, disastrous decision. It chose to accept spectral evidence. Spectral evidence was testimony from the accusers, mostly young girls, that they had been attacked by the specter, or spirit shape, of the accused. Under established English law, this was flimsy stuff, never enough for a conviction. But in the chaos of Salem, this brand new court allowed it as hard fact. This meant a person could be condemned to hang based on someone else's dream or vision, something impossible to disprove. The accused were basically considered guilty until proven innocent, the exact opposite of modern justice. They faced a horrifying choice. If you insisted you were innocent, the court used the spectral evidence to convict and execute you. But if you confessed to being a witch, a crime you didn't commit, and named other people, you were allowed to live. This created a terrifying incentive to lie, causing a chain reaction of false confessions and new accusations that sent the crisis spiraling. It was a legal machine designed to produce more witches, not to find the truth. The trials weren't an act of a functioning state. They were a symptom of a broken one. With a desperate population and a broken legal system, the stage was set for the third, and maybe most cynical factor, money. In Salem, the witch hunt wasn't just a panic. It was a weapon. For years, Salem had been tearing itself apart. It wasn't one community, but two. Salem Town, a wealthy, growing port hub of merchant capitalism, and Salem Village, a poorer, more traditional farming community inland. The farmers in the village felt left behind and exploited by the merchants in the town, who controlled their taxes and crop prices. This created deep-seated resentment that festered for years. The groundbreaking work of historians Paul Boyer and Stephen Nissenbaum in Salem Possessed revealed this conflict by literally mapping where the accusers and the accused lived. They found that the accusers were overwhelmingly from the struggling, traditional part of Salem Village. The accused, meanwhile, were often people with closer ties to the commercial world of Salem Town, representing a new economic order that threatened the old way of life. The accusations followed clear lines of personal and economic conflict. Long-running feuds over land, property lines, and church politics exploded into the courtroom, dressed up as accusations of witchcraft. The powerful Putnam family, leaders of the traditional farming faction, were the engine behind many of the accusations. Their targets were often members or allies of the rival Porter family, who represented the merchant interests of Salem Town. Accusing a rival of witchcraft became a socially acceptable and legally sanctioned way to get rid of an economic competitor or settle an old score. This wasn't just about bad blood. It was about property. Many of the accused were women who, for one reason or another, stood in the way of an orderly transfer of land between men, like widows who had inherited property. Accusing them was a way to remove them from the picture and get their assets. The witch hunt became a brutal tool for social and economic reordering. It was class warfare, fought with a noose. So if the system was designed to create an endless supply of victims, why did it all stop? Because it became too successful. The accusations started with marginalized people, the enslaved woman, Tituba, the homeless beggar, Sarah Good. But they soon began to climb the social ladder. As the accusers grew bolder, they started naming more powerful members of the community. Then, they made a fatal mistake. They accused the wife of Governor William Phipps himself. Suddenly, the elites who had let the chaos run wild were personally threatened. At that moment, the political will to continue the trials completely evaporated. Governor Phipps abruptly dissolved the Court of Oyer and Terminer in October 1692. He set up a new court that was forbidden from using spectral evidence. Without the legal engine that drove it, the whole process ground to a halt. Of the dozens more who were tried, almost all were acquitted, and by May 1693, Phipps had pardoned everyone. The trials didn't stop because people suddenly stopped believing in witches. They stopped because the people in power decided it was no longer in their best interest. In the years that followed, the colony slowly reckoned with what it had done. Public apologies were issued, and in 1711, the Massachusetts legislature formally exonerated many of the victims and paid restitution to their families. The horrors of the trials directly influenced the American legal system, helping to establish bedrock principles like the right to legal representation and the presumption of innocence. The witch trials weren't some bizarre, superstitious blip in history. They were a demonstration of a timeless and terrifying human pattern. They show us that when societies are put under extreme stress, from environmental disaster, political chaos, or economic anxiety, they become vulnerable. People start looking for simple answers to complex problems, and the easiest answer is often a scapegoat, someone to blame, someone to punish, someone whose removal promises that everything will go back to normal. This pattern didn't die in the 17th century. We see its echoes today, whenever a group of people is blamed for a nation's economic problems, when political opponents are branded as existential threats, or when fear and uncertainty are used to grab power. The language changes, but the mechanism is the same. The forces of climate, politics, and money that converged on Salem are still with us. The witch trials are a chilling reminder that the greatest monsters aren't out in the woods, but are the fear, greed, and calculated hatred that can turn neighbors into executioners. If this look into the real causes of the witch trials surprised you, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more history that challenges everything we thought we knew.